Okay, welcome everybody. Today we are going to talk a bit about power, your personal power, how you can diagnose it, where your power stems from, your power bases, some contingencies of power that may increase or mitigate your ability to wield that power over time. So let's dive right in so that we can use this to enhance our career competency and better understanding for our organization. Okay, so our sources of organizational power stem from either formal sources or personal sources. Okay, we'll start with the formal that are granted by the organization or informally by others, right? And there are three general types. The first being, of course, legitimate, right? You have a boss. The boss has the power, right? The boss can tells you what to do. You have to follow the orders. We do a lot of work within the military, right? A higher ranking officer tells the lower ranking officer or junior officer what to do, they have to follow those orders, right? That is legitimate power, and there's hierarchical structure within the workplace to varying degrees. The second, that may stem or coincide with legitimate power, but not always, is reward power. Now, this, of course, is your ability to reward employees or people for good behavior, right? You can give people as a reward time off. You can give them a bonus. You can give them a promotion, or perhaps just reward them with some form of recognition, right? Whether it be formal or informal types of recognition. But you have the ability to reward people for their positive behavior. The flip side of that same coin is coercive power. Now, just because someone has reward power doesn't mean they have coercive power, but they do often go a little bit hand in hand. And coercive power is your ability to punish, right? So a boss may be able to fire you. Now, we know that that ability is a bit mitigated in the current workforce times. Again, we work in the military, and you can't just fire military personnel, right? There's a lot of steps to go through in order to make that happen, right? But you can think and resonate many of these things within your family as well. With our children out there, we tend to prefer to try to reward them for good behavior with an ice cream cone, or for good grades with some money or a car. Or on the flip side, for bad behavior, we would ground them or take away iPad time or something like that. Um, and so both of those things align in the workplace and in your family. And I encourage you to try to think of insights that may, of all the different organizations that these may correspond to. Now, as I said, the other type is your personal sources of power, and these are generated by your individual attributes and characteristics. Now, these have been shown by research to be far more influential, frankly, than the formal sources of power, right? As if you're trying to influence people, if you're in a leadership role, whatever it may be, right, the personal sources of power carry more weight. And so, what are those, right? First is expert power, your expertise, right? The skill set that you may have that adds value to your organization, right? I'm filming this during tax season. Right now, my accountant has a lot of expert power, right? We rely on our accountant to be able to do our taxes for us because it is out of my capability. My wife is a lawyer. She has a tremendous amount of expertise in all things legal, whether it be employment law or criminal law. She actually knows quite a bit about all those things. And she garners power from numerous sources, both within her organization for her specific forms of legal expertise, but also generally within our friends and family and public as people come to her relying on her expertise in a number of ways. For me personally, hopefully you are watching this video because you believe that I have some form of expertise in organizational psychology. And as such, I hopefully have a little bit of influence over you in learning these concepts. Right? And then, of course, the most powerful tends to be referent power. Okay, referent power stems from an individual's ability to be admired and liked by others, right? The extent to which you may admire an individual because of their accomplishments, because of their personality, perhaps their charisma is often tied in with referent power as well. But nevertheless, you admire and respect them and hence want to be around them. Oftentimes, we think of this as the type of person you might want to have a beer with. Okay, so celebrities often carry a fair amount of referent power. Professional athletes like LeBron James or Michael Jordan, because of their expertise and expert power that they had at playing basketball, also have tremendous amount of referent power, in that people want to be associated with them, and they are able to enact influence over other spheres beyond just basketball because of people's desire to be around them. You can also think back to the people that have really had some real influence over you. That's what power is, the ability to influence. And so you might think back on some of the incredible teachers, mentors, coaches that you've had over your lifetime that really influenced you. Right? It probably wasn't because of their legitimate role as teacher or as their ability to reward you with good grades or punish you. It probably stemmed from one, maybe their incredible expertise and knowledge in a subject they might have been teaching you. But it's also probably because you admired them and something about them, right? So leaders, celebrities, mentors, etc. Right? There's one more form of power that is particularly important in today, in the workforce today, in the information society that we live in. And that is, you guessed it, informational power, right? Now that stems from both of these, right? You may have access to information because of your role or position in an organization, right? Your job may have information filter through it that other people in your organization do not get. Right? Oftentimes, people at the front lines of an organization, so-called lower levels, have greater access to information on the ground, so to speak. And and the upper management is relying on individuals and their informational power to hopefully float that upward, right? But we know that information equals power for your ability to negotiate, for your ability to have first mover advantage, to be able to sense and see what's coming in the economy, right? You may also have access to this informational power, though, because of your personal individual attributes and characteristics. That is somewhat stemming from your expert and referent power, right? An expert may be able to access greater information, but people may be coming to experts, right, with more information, seeking guidance, seeking a direction, right? Or because of an individual with high referent power, their strong, vast network of contacts, right, of people wanting to work with them may bring them more information than others may normally have, right? So it can really stem from both places and really increase your power. Now, these are the bases of power. And so you want to take a second and really sit back and think about those, right? As I talked about, bringing this back to your family to some degree. And we talked about how personal power is more powerful than formal power. We all know, those of us that are parents out there, that we've had to rely on, the carrot and the stick, i.e., reward and coercive power. But we also know that it's far more influential if our children are looking up to us with referent power and admiring the people that we are, right? And we can influence them much greater over the long term through our referent power. Now we're going to discuss contingencies of power. Now, these are those things that, as I said, can either accentuate any of the power bases that we have, give us even more power because of them, or they may actually mitigate, right? They may cut into our power to some degree, all right? And there's a handful of these. First is non-substitutability, right? This is the availability of alternatives that are out there, right? Think about when the first form of AI came out, right? And it was the only one available. Now there are a whole bunch. Like there was Chat GPT. Now there's a whole bunch of other alternatives out there. Google, right, was on top, still is, of course, but there are also various other alternatives. Okay, so the ability for somebody else or something else to fill the same job that you have. And this is why unions, right, are trying to lobby and make sure that technology doesn't, replace them, right? Again, as we talk, I just used the example of AI, right? AI may replace all of us one day, right? And that minimizes our expert power, right? Whatever expertise we had, it's now being mitigated by other forms of technology being able to conduct the work, right? Next would be centrality, right? And this is a degree of interdependence that others have on you in the organization. Okay, and if you think about this, I like to use sports a lot as metaphors here, right? The quarterbacks have an extremely high degree of centrality, and this is why they get paid the most. Same with pitchers in baseball. All of their contracts are far larger than the rest of the people on the team, and it's because of their centrality, which accentuates, again, their expertise or their expert power. Okay. Why? Because quarterbacks touch the ball on every single play. They go up, they get behind the center, and everybody has their job to do. But the quarterback reads over the defense, maybe makes an audible on the play once he gets up to the line, right? And he's the one who ultimately has to either hand off the ball and do it cleanly or throw the ball to a wide receiver. And so all of the other players are doing their jobs extremely well, but everything is utterly dependent on the quarterback having to do his job first. Similarly with a pitcher, right? The entire game doesn't move unless the pitcher actually throws the ball, right? If the pitcher doesn't get up there and actually throw a pitch to the batters, nothing happens. Every single thing that happens in baseball happens after the pitcher throws and either the batter swings or the batter hits it and everything and all the runners moving, everything is dependent first and foremost on the pitcher and his ability to execute his pitches. One more example I'll use here is pilots, right? If you guys were out there and we're all on a plane and we want to fly to, I don't know, let's say we all want to go to Vegas for the weekend, and for some reason they said, "Hey, look, guys, we're understaffed," and they wouldn't let you do this for FAA regulations, I'm sure, but hey, we don't have any flight attendants for this flight. Do you guys still want to go? I bet 99 out of 100 of us say, sure, let's go, right? But if they said, hey, we've got flight attendants, but we don't have any pilots, would we go, right? No, we probably would not, right? We cannot fly the plane. We cannot get to where we need to go without the pilots and their expert power, right? So it's accentuated in that moment. If you think about being in midair, 30,000 feet above the ground, our lives are literally in the pilot's hands. That is a tremendous amount of power that they have, right? And similarly for professors, right, when we hold classes, right, if any individual student can't make it to class, class goes on. But if the professor can't make it, class is canceled for the day, right? So those are some examples of centrality. Next would be discretion. And this is your ability to wield some of the power that you have. But typically, we think of it as being able to wield your legitimate reward or coercive power. Okay. Freedom to exercise your own judgment. And if you guys remember back in the day, President Donald Trump was on his show, The Apprentice, right? And he had his catch line, "You fired," right? And he had that discretion. He could just fire whoever. They were off the show. See you later, right? And to some degree, we have that in the workplace, right? In some organizations, back in the day in the workplace, you could fire people pretty much at will. Now we have human resources and various other things that have limited our discretion to be able to do that, right? And lots of loopholes to jump through, so to speak. But similarly for Trump, right? Once he got into office, right, his discretion was mitigated. He was not used to having so much, his power kind of mitigated by the other three branches of government, right? That's why we have Congress and the framers of the Constitution were so brilliant, and we have the courts, right? And we continue to see that today as he attempts to exercise even greater discretion in his second term as president and really wielding his executive power. He's really testing the limits of his discretionary power of the executive branch. And then those things are tested in the courts, right? And that kind of, we'll see to the extent to which those are mitigated, right? And so that's an example of discretion. How much can you actually utilize the legitimate power given to you or your coercive power? In sports, back in the day, the coaches used to be able to, run the kids into the ground, used to probably be able to work them out extra hard. I think back in the day when my dad was in school growing up and, the nuns used to hit him with a ruler, right? Can't do that anymore, right? Discretion is mitigated compared to that nowadays. Right? Another massive one is visibility, right? Do people actually know about your power base? It's great that you're an expert. If nobody knows, then who cares? Then you don't actually have any particular power, right? If people don't know that you can, punish them or reward them in some way, is it really particularly useful, right? And so some really good examples here. Unfortunately, this is why terrorism happens, right? So take 9/11, for instance. Nobody, very, very, very few people in the world knew who Osama bin Laden was before the Twin Towers came down. That day, the entire world knew his name, right? And at that point in time, he was able to wield a tremendous amount of power, right? He was able to garner people to his movement, as disgusting as we may think it is, right? But he was now on TV all the time, right? By a highly visible act, gained greater power, and in this instance, showed and enhanced his coercive power, right? Right. The media, of course, enables this, right? I just talked about Donald Trump and his discretion. One of the major reasons he was able to get elected was because the media, he was on the media all the time. He's very, very good at getting his face out there and creating more stories about himself. So highly visible individual can garner even greater power, whether for him, potentially referent power and getting people to like him, but really just about getting people to notice, right? And then maybe notice his expertise and his ideas, whatever it may be. In the workforce, right? You want to do this in organizations with mentorships. This is why we find mentors out, because they can make us visible to some of the higher people in the organization, expose us to other leaders within the organization. Right? And last, we have your social and your professional network. And this is, incredibly powerful because it has shown to increase all of the others, right? When I talk about mentorship, right, your mentors are actually people in your professional network, right? So they expose you to greater visibility, right? The more people that you have in your network, right, typically the greater discretion you're going to be able to have to over the influence that you have. You're likely to become more central to various operations as people come seeking information from you or seeking you as a connection to other information, right? And you can become a non-substitutable node within other people's professional network. So that covers the bases of power and the contingencies of power.